What is up, y'all? It's your boy Aniki coming at you with another My Hero Academia review, doing chapter 343. So if you haven't read it, you gotta go free. All right, let's get right into it, doing the breakdown page by page, as you already know how it goes. So we instantly open up with a monologue from All For One, with him saying that lies do not work on him. Now, in the previous videos on the channel, we've discussed how Makoto Tsukauchi has the quirk Polygraph and how that quirk allows her to be in physical contact with people and, while she is touching them, to tell if they are lying. This quirk is one that I mentioned that seemed indicative of someone in the Tsukauchi family potentially being a traitor. Now we get the explanation here that All For One, way back during the advent of the exceptional, so some 100 years ago most likely, took the quirk from one of Tsukauchi's ancestors and eventually modified it himself so that he could add some twist and kinks to it to make it a bit more powerful, so that he can effectively use it as be a human lie detector beyond physical contact, but also be able to sense it while just simply conversing with people. Kind of a logical conclusion or a step to take with that quirk. Now, what we get then is obviously he's always insulting people, so that's whatever. All For One crapping on people, saying that they're not worth anything, that's par for the course. And then we get a conversation between All For One and Aoyama's parents, where he's talking about how he monologues into it with there's no greater joy than when the seeds sown at last bear fruit, just like, yeah, I'm finally winning, I'm getting all this stuff going. He mentions, I'm hankering for a fine drink, perhaps a 40-year Macallan. And then when the parents say, how about one age 16 years, our son could deliver it to you, AFO says, it sounds perfect. One of the things that I want to say about this is that this metaphor and this code is a continuation of the same metaphor that he gave Gran Torino. It's like squeezing wine from grapes. What he was talking about with making nomus and that whole process. So this is just kind of a continuation of his comparing quirks to wine. Just in general, comparing it to alcohol. Note that Macallan is one of the more famous and valued scotches. So with Macallan even having bottles that sell into the thousands, I believe a 40-year actually does sell for a couple thousand. This is a very high praise for the quirk of One For All. All For One isn't just, saying, oh, like that guy just for the sake of it. No, like he specifically did acknowledge the value of this asset, which I find hilarious because he spends so much time talking down on Midoriya. And then we get this shot of a wide city shot, but what the shot does is actually, it shows us these two dots, and it's a play on the search quirk, or it's the search quirk active, and it's effectively All For One looking at Aoyama and Deku meeting up. So this is him pulling up, already being within the area of where they're supposed to be meeting up, make sure to be within close proximity. And so when we see Deku pull up and we get the new costume reveal, Aoyama's out, and they have this whole discussion about how lawyers got him released, how even with all this stuff, it's kind of a sham to be trying to model and live in the old ways of society, and it's absurd. And it's really overall, like, looking at the outside of knowing and assuming there's going to be some kind of plan, it's a very convincing bit of dialogue from Aoyama to just simply talk about how society can be thrown away, or we can change things, and how with the way the world is and was, how All For One is the way. And we can talk about this real quick because we start to talk about something that we've mentioned on this channel a lot, which is the socio-economic policies and ramifications from the fallout of the war. When they talk about the value of the yen dropping, because currency operates on a fiat, which is partially on this trust system, essentially because of the work and or some money is even called promissory notes, which is effectively because of the labor, which means the money represents a direct conversion of labor into finances or time, essentially. So when your region is seen as a place that can't produce goods or is completely destabilized, the odds of you actually delivering a valuable product or delivering on those said goods is considerably lower, which means as your country is struggling, so too does your currency drop in its value, and people's trust in you lowers, etc. It's basically like currency in of itself kind of has like a stock market aspect to it, which is what the whole forex thing is, where people buy foreign exchange, foreign currencies, and then hope that those numbers go up, and then if they buy them at higher rates, and then switch them back out and do all this other stuff to make money off of money just existing and having its value change. Now, the idea that All for One would purposely cause multiple nations to go into a socioeconomic crisis is basically the full-scale version of how you actually take over the world. Because so often people's rule the world plans are, I'm going to destroy everything, I'm going to cause a war where I am a direct opposition to the rest of the forces, an easy rallying point. By All for One having gangs and stuff destabilize neighborhoods and communities and towns across the world, causing general instability, hurting travel, hurting. So think about this. There's realistically, there's been almost no tourism for the last month. And for those of us who have been paying attention to the economic situation, so even a little bit during the pandemic, we've seen different businesses and industries borderline collapse, multiple restaurants in multiple people's areas just gone, bars fading just off of a couple months of non-operation. The same thing happening across the world, but not only because of, just simple health crisis, but in this case, someone actively stirring up violence, which means not only are you losing people, you're losing them in an unpredictable way, in a way that can't properly be mitigated, and at a rate that can't be accounted for. Furthermore, these roles and stuff cannot be replaced. If a bunch of people who work on the system that keeps the water clean for a major city die, then that's not going to magically be fixed. It's going to take either somebody with a quirk, which All for One could find them and take their quirk, and then the only way you're going to get fresh, clean water in these cities is if you are loyal to All for One. Just controlling different resources, and not by directly causing the problems yourself and being someone that people would be opposed to, but by allowing yourself to be presented as a savior and as an option, even though he's been fanning the flames since the advent of the exceptional to cause these problems. Not only would his quirk allow him to have complete control over, quirk exchange, because at this point, everything about society has been gearing to and focusing more and more on quirks, to the extent that he has now taken his power, allows him to take the very concept or the very thing that society cares about, the linchpin of it, and then control that itself. So being able to move quirks around while having already bottomed out many currencies and having already been a wealthy person capable of reaching out and acquiring that wealth and having offshore things, so that he's not personally impacted by these multiple recessions throughout nations, is the scenario. Or if any of this is starting to sound very familiar to you, it's because it is very much similar to what has happened during the pandemic, with a lot of corporate executives or CEOs kind of still trudging along, going just fine as far as their personal pockets are, but their companies or their employees are getting cut off left and right, etc. So that's kind of essentially, if you hadn't figured it out by now, the main point of MHA has always been that an overly individualistic, glorified person and celebrity worship, over marketing, saturating, focusing on consumption and the bread and circuses aspect of life and all these other things, effectively capitalism bad, has been the message of MHA for a really long time. I'm sorry if you didn't realize it, but this is effectively what he is, the ultimate capitalist, the ultimate opportunist, trying to manipulate markets, create them, corner them, and monopolize them so that he comes out on top and is forever not only wealthy, sure, but also by having the quirks. Like, somebody likened him to a bank. I believe that was my buddy Bulk. But it's kind of like he wants to be more than that. He genuinely is trying to be not only an economic linchpin, but a social one, a religious figure. He wants to very much be. When he says demon lord, he very much does wish to ascend to a level of deification. And if you can get him an immortal body or the ability to keep passing on his body, and you give him all the power in the world or the ability to manipulate quirks, then sure enough, then what else could you call him within the context of this world? It's basically a legitimate, well thought out, nuanced plan to achieve godhood within a primarily science fiction type based series with fantasy blended. After Aoyama goes on his whole thing, giving us this dump, this information on the way All For One wants to handle things, take control of the world, we see that All For One begins to appear in the background, and Aoyama's talking about how he has to protect his family. Now Deku is there, and it's supposed to, you see it's just Deku and Aoyama, and then boom, All For One is here. It also looks like they're just kind of out in the middle of the street by like a parking garage, which is excellent because this is also likely to be a low civilian area, so they're not fighting at one of the shelters, which obviously the shelters have to kind of come into play because we've set up the E-way barrier and combining the Shiketsu and all these other things. So we have All For One kind of congratulating Aoyama for being willing to betray him, and it's like, yeah, you overcame fear and pain. Now this is something that is true. You could say yes, they overcame fear and pain, but he overcame the fear and pain not to betray Deku, but to betray All For One and make a stand as a hero and try to take him out. Now All For One manages to simply handle the laser and even labels Aoyama as ungrateful since he gave him this mediocre quirk that makes him crap his pants. But, you know, All For One things, you know, and that's the other thing, right? Is that nobody wants to work meme. All For One right there, that boss. Now we get the idea, we see them like working together, and All For One is talking about how disappointing it is, and he detects no lies. Now this is where I want to go back to what we were talking about before when we were talking about their coded conversation, the way they're interacting with each other. If you look at one of the earlier pages, when you can see Aoyama's mom's eyes, Mama Yama, her eyes are shadowed, and this could suggest that Shinso mind controlled her, and since she was not actively doing anything, and she was not actively really in control of what she was saying, All For One could not detect anything from her because her will was not what was even guiding the conversation in the first place. And the same could even possibly have been applied to Aoyama. And this might seem like odd because people are like, well, you know, he said he couldn't make people talk. But I'm going to point something out to you. A Shinso that had primarily been focusing on his physicals and working on, you know, using a support item, said he couldn't make people talk. A Shinso who did not start getting any hero training whatsoever or quirk training until, what was it, maybe May or June of the year going into this. So, you know, into the second term effectively, maybe a little bit before then. So it's been about 4 or 5 months since we last got an update on Shinso's quirk. At this point in the story, keep in mind, so joint training takes place in early December. That means Shinso told us in December, I can't make people talk. By May, April, late April, May, he's figured out a way to make people talk. That's not that crazy of a jump in power if he's actually utilizing his quirk and getting to practice it. And it's especially worth noting that we've seen Bakugo go from not being able to reliably make, you know, as big explosions, or what you can really track is that when he used super explosive turbo speed back during the quirk apprehension test, he barely gets off the ground with it. But by the time we are now in the series, he's flying everywhere, and that is also a good 6 to 8 months of training. So leveling your quirk up beyond your basic understanding of it can net you a lot stronger abilities and techniques, and getting better control of somebody's brainwashing, or even more subtle control forms of brainwashing, are logical progressions. Because the other step is that instead of them basically being rendered into a state of unconsciousness, they just get fed certain orders and programs and then go without even realizing it. We don't know the depths of how brainwash is going to keep developing and evolving, but we do know that ultimately it makes complete sense for the quirk to have progressed, and for someone who had little experience to maybe lowball the expectations or the power level of what they can do. So don't be too surprised if it ends up being Shinso who was behind this reveal, or this setup of them being able to lie. Now, it's worth noting though that All For One himself says that it doesn't matter how they lied to him, and this is kind of one of the first times All For One is just straight up being completely reckless. And you can tell that he's just moving to be reckless because he sees One For All right here. And this is why I've seen people debate whether All For One is just evil for the sake of being evil. And I agree about that. But I do think that there is this modicum of him that is obsessed not only with One For All, the power, but One For All because he wants that vestige of his brother so badly. And so that's where that emotionality, because if he was able to 100% just bury all that stuff, he would be on top here. He would have seen Deku, and Aoyama would have betrayed him. He would have instantly shot an air bullet through Aoyama and called it a day and started airing out Deku. He wouldn't have even wasted time. But he had to brag and gloat, and part of it is that he has to make sure he doesn't accidentally kill Deku. So when you factor all that in, this aspect of his emotionality, he's so ready to try to finally get control of One For All and get control of his little brother. Just like during the war, the first thing, I'm pretty sure the very first thing Vestige for One says is, "You will be mine, little brother." That's the first time that Shigaraki becomes aware of it, and it's the first time that we really get confirmation that the voice he's hearing isn't just like his quirk. Even though I do want to point out that the first thing he was saying was destroy, which makes me always made me feel like Decay managed to start talking to him, but All For One, because of All For One, but that's a whole other thing. So when All For One, it's like, it matters not, drops off the jacket, trap or not, One For All is here within reach, we're gonna go to town. And he's like, search shows me your weaknesses. I can see where you're weak. I don't need to be afraid of anybody here, in theory, is All For One's approach. So what that's going to lead to, I do not know. Because with this fight, in theory, popping off, because as All For One is warping in all these villains, first off, we see Toga still not happy with this quirk. We see at least one high-end. We see the return of the dude that was all muscle tongue looking, kind of like a penis too, if we're being honest here. That All Might fought on his way to work during the USJ arc. We see the return of the samurai, or as people have been dubbing, Greninja. There's a whole host of different characters coming back. But one of the things that I also want to point out here is that the new outfit that Dabi is wearing is very similar to what is called a death kimono. And Dabi's body, being able to see his actual chest, we see how much his scarring is spread. Not only did we see that back on his hands back in the day, but now we get to see it with his actual chest and abdomen, just looking kind of like a wreck. He is dying. And I kind of expect Dabi to be doing this partially because he's expecting to die here. That was the vibe that I got out of the last chapter with that chapter with him and Toga, of how he became heroes part -1, where I kind of felt like Dabi, not only was he okay with them dying, but he was fully expecting them all to die in the upcoming conflict. As long as he got to destroy everything else, that's what matters to him. Now, Shigaraki's appearance in this panel, I will say, I think this is another one of All For One's big mistakes, because by pulling Shigaraki, I don't think Shigaraki is done healing yet. You can still see like the extra cracks and stuff like that on him, where it looks like he is more than likely almost finished, but not quite there yet. And the fact that Shigaraki is at that state while still wearing that tattered cloak with the white hair, in addition to the other opportunities now that he's finally coming face to face with Midoriya, we got some room for All For One to do and betray him in some serious ways, but also for him to break free and become the dominant personality again, if that's really what he's after, and potentially put an end to All For One. Because to me, this conflict feels like the end of the battle with All For One. All For One, the Demon Lord, the Lord of... Now, we transition, though, after all these villains pop out. And, you know, and All For One is flexing and talking about how he's planned and schemed for all the heroes being dispersed, so he can just mobilize all his people to this front. Effectively, what the heroes have done here is their strategy was, at first, we're going to find you and bring the fight to you. And then they realized the better solution was to have All For One, to bring the fight to All For One while All For One brought the fight to them. In essence, setting up a counterplay and giving us this payoff for one, Monoma being in the story for large chunks, and seeing Monoma develop a closeness not only to Eri but through proxy to Aizawa. Also noting that he was at the training camp arc, and during the training camp arc he was locked away, just kind of stuck, and then progressing further through all these other things, watching people develop powers. When you have the One For All dud, and you have him trying to learn how to use Eri's quirk, and it's a dud, but we've been seeing him use all these other people's quirks, and they've been trying to save Kurogiri, but they haven't been able to activate him. And so now the guy whose name was Phantom Thief steals the powers of a shade in order to bring justice to the good guys. And that waxes poetic with what he talked about during joint training about acting like a villain, in this case taking a villain's power to be a hero. And the same would apply to Shinso, in this case using his brainwashing on the traitors, manipulating villains, so to speak, so that they could lie to and deceive a villain. Deception being considered a villainous tactic, ways to use brain control to, even if it's not on his opponent, because he can't brain control AFO via that, but through phone calls, but he can, brain control other people around AFO and manipulate the people around, as the same way that All For One manipulates the flow of information and the context of things and the people around the good guys and the other heroes, or around Deku. So them operating as villains to achieve heroic ambitions. And with Endeavor, and obviously the heroes aren't done being teleported in, the villains probably aren't done being teleported in, because there's no Genus, there's no Hawks, we don't see Shota, we don't see Bakugo, we don't see Uraraka. So with us not seeing so many characters, and with All For One's teleportation having that, or warping being kind of based around sending things either to him, either sending things away from him or to him, and to people, so either like sending people to other people or sending people to himself, so bringing them to himself, he's limited in his like teleportation options. I do still think we have to consider if Makia is going to be teleported at all, or if maybe warping has a very specific restriction that the people who are being warped have to be conscious. That could be a thing about it. It could have a shorter range on it than Kurogiri's teleportation. We're not really sure how this the intricacies of that particular quirks work. Now, when you focus in on how Monoma is going to play into this, they talked about how they wanted to be able to split up All For One and Shigaraki, and they needed to do it at least 10 kilometers. This seems to be the most viable way to do that. Have Monoma drop different villains that they've planned to fight into designated fight zones, and then have the main battalion go straight on with All For One and whoever else with Dabi. If Dabi is transported to Shoto and other characters, and Endeavor's pulled over there, or whatever the case may be, however the forces are distributed, making sure to optimize your battle and trying to really control the matchups. It'll be harder for, in my opinion, it'll be harder for All For One to constantly have to be focusing on pulling people back to himself while dodging attacks than it would be for somebody to send for Monoma to open these gates just beneath them at specific coordinates, because he doesn't have to really lock onto them as long as he has one eye over there and he can see, and he's in a position where he can see well, and the other part of him can still realistically be safe in the prison or the central hospital. Then he can keep bringing people on, keep warping, keep control of the battlefield, really allowing it to go the hero's way. So Monoma's going to be an important target. If he's actually by Aizawa, we have a chance of Monoma copying Erasure. Now, the downside to that is that if he copies Erasure, he has to effectively stop using teleportation to temporarily erase those quirks, but it could do such wonders for the battlefield that it may be worth it if the time comes. Monoma being able to steal the spotlight, perhaps by doing like stealing somebody else's quirk to neutralize another quirk, which, since the effects set on them don't necessarily end, there's a chance that Monoma could erase someone's quirk, turn it off, and then switch quirks, and because he switched quirks, no longer be restricted by having to blink or not, and then they could just be indefinitely set, just like a nut or bolt that is made large is large indefinitely until she uses her quirk to change the size again back during joint training. So because of the rules of Monoma's quirk, we could get some interesting rules with Aizawa's. So just some stuff to think about. Joint training actually paying off some serious dividends here. I hope you guys enjoyed the chapter. I'm going to try to end it here because we're approaching that 30-minute mark, and that's, one, not good for the algorithm, but two, most of you aren't watching past like the first 10 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed it, though. Sincerely, this has been a great chapter. Hope to see you guys next Sunday. For the Church of MHA, we're going to be discussing Deku without a quirk, or how quirkless Deku... Yeah, imagine Deku without a quirk here at this juncture in the story. Insanity. What is he going to do? Have a sniper rifle? Like, with a quirk erasing bullet, and that's just going to be the end? Bow, I shot him. Come on, guys. Get it together. With that said, I'm Aniki, and I'm out.